When I think about all of the moments where there's been a moment that's made a difference to my life and career that's helped me now become the leader that I am today, I think saying yes when you're not sure is probably the theme.
I like that, and I'm just curious, so when you say yes, is that you listening to your gut saying it's a yes and maybe it's the head going, oh, not sure, or is it the other way around?
That's a great question.
Hello and welcome back to the Courageous Leaders podcast, brought to you by the Change Creators, where we strengthen leadership teams creating environments where people and profits can grow together. I'm your host, Joanna Howes, and on today's episode, we have the brilliant Paul Coxhill, Chief Operating Officer, Lions, and President, Lions Intelligence. With a career spanning leadership roles at WGSN, Essential, and Barclays, Paul is a visionary in marketing and business growth. So let's get started. Paul, welcome to the show. It's fantastic to have you here. Thank you.
Great to be here. Thank you for having me.
You ready to start?
Yeah.
Let's go. What's been a courageous moment for you in your career so far?
Yeah, it's a really tough question, this one, but the way I think about it is when I reflect on the most courageous and impactful moments are usually those where I've said yes, when I've not necessarily known whether the yes was the right answer. And if I think about an example of that is back in around 2004, 2005. So I'd been at Barclays for nearly 10 years by that point. I'd been a marketer for 10 years. And I had the opportunity to leave and go to South Africa, still with Barclays, but to leave the UK and go there. I'd recently moved to London. I was in the first year of a new relationship. I had a good job. So I was kind of in two minds. I'd always had a little bit of an idea of moving overseas. And the opportunity came up. Barclays was acquiring a bank in South Africa called ABSA. And I was asked to go out and help with that acquisition. So I said yes, not necessarily knowing exactly what it was going to work out like, but ended up having three of the most amazing years of my career and my life, actually. And when I think about all of the moments where there's been a moment that's made a difference to my life and career that's helped me now become the leader that I am today, I think saying yes when you're not sure is probably the theme.
I like that. And I'm just curious. So when you say yes, is that you listening to your gut saying it's a yes and maybe it's the head going, oh, not sure, or is it the other way around?
That's a great question. I think it's a bit of both. I think I am a believer in gut feel being important. Listen to your gut, obviously with caveats. So always make sure you've got facts that complement the emotion. But my immediate reaction from my gut was, this is a great opportunity. You should really think about going for it. And then, of course, all the practical stuff about, but you've just bought a house, but how's that going to work? And all of that stuff comes to the fore. But I think, if you really then think about fast forward 10 years, which is actually the thought experiment, excuse me, that I did at the time, fast forwarded 10 years to say, would I regret that in 10 years if I missed that opportunity? And that ultimately led me to seriously consider it. I went out, met some of the people to make sure it wasn't a foolhardy decision, and then went all in. And I think that's the other thing is when you say yes, then go all in. Don't say yes with half-hearted
hesitation.
Hesitation, exactly. But and it was one of the best decisions I ever made.
It really just reminds me, because I think this made me smile because I had exactly the same. I just lived in my house for a year. We just finished decorating and I got the opportunity to go to Melbourne.
Right.
But it's exactly that same thing of, like, my husband immediately was like, what? No. I was like, right, sleep on it.
Yeah.
And then it was a yes in the morning. But it's the same. It's that thinking ahead to go, could this end up being a regret if I don't at least give it a shot and give it a go? And it's that wonderful question, isn't it? What's the worst that could happen?
Yeah.
You just come home.
Yeah, exactly right.
At least you've given it a go and you've tried. And it ended up becoming a standard for me of say yes and work out how.
Yeah.
And that has led me to writing a book, getting on stage. And you say yes and you go, I'm going to be sick. And then you're like, okay, I'm going to figure it out.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's that piece of you will figure it out.
Yeah.
It's like when somebody has a terrible haircut. You kind of go, it'll grow back.
Yeah,
you'll be okay.
Right.
And I think, the lots of colleagues that I've worked with since, we've spoken about, should I take that opportunity? Should I not? One of the people who works in my team took an opportunity to move to New York and we had exactly the same conversation. You can always come back. So I think, the theme of just saying yes, even if you're not sure, is fundamental, I think, to being somebody who can progress in their career. And I think sometimes people look for a little bit more certainty than there is available. And sometimes you just got to go for it.
As I say, how do you think that has shaped then, by saying yes and going to South Africa, how has that shaped you as a leader? How did it change your view of the world, that experience?
I mean, it was a salutary experience in so many ways. Obviously, going to a completely new culture, understanding people working and thinking in a different way, not a completely different way, but in a different way. And of course, there was the bigger cultural context that South Africa, when I went in 2005, was only 10, 15 years post-apartheid. So, I remember sitting in a meeting with the head of savings at the bank and the head of current accounts. There was a white guy and a black guy. And in the meeting, they suddenly realised they'd been fighting on opposite sides in the war just 15, 20 years before in Angola. And the power of seeing people come together and figuring things out, having gone through such a massive ruction in their life, I think particularly given what's going on in the world at the moment, was incredibly powerful for me to see that level of forgiveness and that level of desire to move forwards and to move forwards in a really positive way. So culturally, it was a fascinating experience. I learned a lot there about inclusion. I mean, if you go back to what I said earlier, I'd been 10 years in Barclays. Obviously, at the time, probably didn't really appreciate the privilege of being born in the 1970s as a white guy in the UK. And had kind of gone through a career that had been fairly uneventful by that point and progressed reasonably well. And I think being in a country where you saw the kind of just complete exclusion of a whole group of people, or the majority of people, for so many decades, made me really understand and appreciate a completely different viewpoint on life, on work, and also the power of then really being an ally. And obviously that's become something that's been part of vernacular in the Western world in the last few years. But for me, that awakening started in South Africa of really understanding what being an ally really meant. For example, I spent a year leading a team, a customer proposition team in ABSA, and I had to build that team from scratch. And in South Africa, you had to make sure you employed people from a majority non-white background. And in a Western context, that's quite unusual. But in the context there, when a whole population of people has been excluded for decades, to make sure that you're leaning in and helping that next generation come through was incredibly powerful. And what it meant was we just had to look harder for talent. We had to look in places that maybe we didn't look before. And of course, we ended up with an incredible team that, with the right development and support, was much more representative of the communities we were serving. So those lessons for me back in 05 to 08 were really important and fundamental, and have carried forwards with me in my career since.
Incredibly powerful. And you think how important for you to have had the opportunity to see that, to then impact who you became. I was very lucky. Yeah. I'm just really curious sitting here going, so building that team from scratch, bringing in people that, haven't had the opportunities before. Because I know some experiences where people have done that and then these people have left because they still didn't feel like they belonged or didn't know how to fit, or people didn't know how to communicate with each other. What did you learn in that moment of how do you bring people who feel excluded for so long actually then trust you to allow them to feel included? What did that take?
I think it's probably, and alongside saying yes, it's another important lesson is listening. And, I think the best leaders that I've worked with always follow that adage of 2 ears and 1 mouth, and use them in that proportion. And I spent a lot of time just talking and listening to the team, listening to people, listening to them about their individual experiences from all communities, by the way, because all communities were learning to work with each other, and still are, in many places in South Africa and beyond, of course. But the power of just really hearing a story and then understanding the individual motivations of everyone within the team. It was a team of 35 people, so you could spend time with them individually. And that helped me to understand where they were coming from. And oftentimes people wanted to work together, but just didn't have the common language to be able to work out how to do that.
Yeah.
I think as an outsider, as a non-South African, that was actually a help, because I could bring that kind of neutrality, if you like, to some of the conversations. Maybe something to bring that to life. I remember arranging an off-site away day, a team building activity in Soweto. and we were painting an AIDS orphanage, and incredible day. But in the build up to it, I had a lot of people from the white community in the team saying, are we taking armed guards with us when we go to Soweto? Are we going to be safe? And I happened to have been into Soweto a few times in the first couple of years, and I said, no, it's perfectly safe. We can go in together, or we'll go on a bus, etc. But they just never even thought of going to visit or to be part of that experience. So we did that together. We had a great day. We mixed the team together, and just the power of connections during that day, the power of understanding during that day, that sent us light years forwards from where we'd been before.
Thank you for sharing that. It's very poignant, to think about how you as a leader had to be adaptable in that moment, and that's a real mark of leadership. Isn't about you, it's about everybody else, and how do you drive that connection. If you're enjoying this episode and finding it insightful, I want to take a moment and remind you, if you haven't already, to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It's a small action, but it makes a big difference. Not only will you be the first to know when an episode drops, but it really helps us to continue to create this content for leaders like you. And I'd love to hear from you. So if you've got thoughts, questions, or ideas, feel free to drop them in the comments. Also, if you want to explore how my leadership training and coaching can support you and your team, then drop me a DM and we can have a call. Thanks so much. Now let's get back to the episode. Something I am so passionate about, and I spend a lot of time talking to leadership teams about, is fundamentally, if you don't know each other, if you don't understand each other, yes, you might know someone's job title, but that doesn't mean you know that person. You might know the tasks that they're willing to do, but to build that trust, to build that connection, to build that understanding is the absolute foundation for any team to be successful. If we think about today, where you are in your leadership today, what are some of those common, from that experience you had, what are some of the just common practices that are probably quite normal for you now that you make sure happen, that you might see other teams don't do and you can see the consequence?
A couple of things. I think, first of all, making sure that listening is something we all do together, and spending time talking, being really clear about the direction of travel, and reminding people about the direction of travel, and I'll come back to that. But I think that, making sure that, again, individually, we're talking to each other as regularly as we can, because I think in my experience, a vacuum is very unhelpful, and people fill a vacuum with speculation and often with worry and concern that they shouldn't have. So communication is really important. So I think listening, hearing what's going on, but also being really clear on communication. I think one of the things that I've learned, particularly in the last few years, as we've gone through a lot of change in our organisation, is the importance of over-communication. And if you think you've said something once and everyone's received that message, they haven't.
No.
So simple messaging, distilling it down into, as we often say in our business, the power of three. So what are the three things you need to take away? But repeat. I think it's the old Bill Clinton thing, as he always had three things to say and he told everyone the same three things. And I think, from our perspective, particularly as our organisation grows, that clarity of communication, listening, but then communicating is fundamentally important. And then the last thing I would add is always coming back to the why. So why are we doing this? What are we trying to get to? And reminding people that there's a broader purpose to the change. So whenever you're driving change, coming back to why are we doing that, so it doesn't just feel like, oh, here's yet another thing that they're trying to do.
And I think that consistency of communication, because I think unfortunately in business there's way too many assumptions. It's like, we're just going to assume they still know why. We're going to assume that they understand what's going on, and it's so often people don't. And even bring it back to like having a meeting, like, why are we having this meeting? Like, set a really clear purpose and a clear outcome and say there's three things we need to discuss in this meeting. I think as human beings, we just like to have that bit of structure, reassurance and consistency. You mentioned there the amount of change that you've been through. Change is now just a normal, like, we've always had change, but at the speed of change, it's normal now for us. And we've got more coming faster than ever, and I see a lot of leaders just, let's say a deer in headlights. He's like, do I focus on AI at the moment? Do I focus on inclusion? Well, where do I focus? How do I use my time wisely? With the change, could you talk a little bit about the change you've been through and looking back, going, what are some of the lessons? And in hindsight, is there anything you'd have done differently?
Yeah, I mean, maybe for context. So in our organisation over the last few years, we've or was essential, has been split up 3 ways. And the bit of the business that I sit in Lions, has recently been, or last year, acquired by Informa. So, and we've also been acquiring other businesses. So we've been through quite a lot of change. And I think, going back to what I said before, for me, what we try and do always, and don't always succeed, by the way, but what we attempt to try and do is bring that absolute clarity as to this is why we're doing this. So in our case, having a really clear vision, a really clear mission, and linking every decision we make back to that. And, even yesterday I was talking to our marketing team about what we are trying to do and why we're doing it. And we champion creative marketing in our business. And, everything we do, every acquisition we make, every strategic decision we do with our structure, with our people, links back to that. As long as we can hand on heart say that and genuinely mean it, then I think that builds trust, it builds resilience in the organisation because people understand it. Of course, then there's things going on around you that you can't control. You mentioned AI, obviously the geopolitical situation at the moment. These things can all have a massive impact on the business. But one of the things that I spend a lot of time thinking about is really, really focusing on what you can control and trying to remove the things you can't control. There are things you can influence and you should think hard about those. But those 3 buckets of it can influence, can control, can't control is just a really helpful shorthand to almost list out and say, right, these are the things we're going to stay focused in on. And it's as a guy called Martin Fenn from Gazing talks about if you're in the jungle, recognize that you're in the jungle. And you might not straight away need to leave the jungle. You might actually, the first thing that you might want to do is recognize you're there and then figure out, actually, this is a pretty comfortable place for me to be. And if I eventually need to leave, then I just got to look for some tools about how I'm going to find my way out. But, that's all about saying, well, I'm here, it's busy, it's chaotic, but I'm comfortable that I know I'm here consciously. And also I know the things I can control in order to make that next step and try not to worry about the things that you can't. So we keep coming, as you go through change, and we've been through a lot, we keep saying to our teams, focus on what you're doing, keep doing your job brilliantly, and then the organisation and you will be absolutely fine and keep moving forwards.
It's so true, because I talk about the work I do with 6 core needs, and there's 2 needs, is that we need certainty and we need uncertainty. And so like another way of saying it's security and a bit of variety and a bit of adventure. And what I love there is that you've got all this change going on, which is the adventure, the variety. If you don't also steady the ship and give that clarity and a direction, that variety and that uncertainty becomes really overwhelming for people, and that's when the anxious and that void vacuum creeps in. But actually, if you imagine like a seesaw, if you can balance, actually, we've got lots of change, but we can also bring some certainty. People can then find their comfort zone in the jungle,
exactly,
while they need to, and work out then how they're going to navigate around that jungle.
Yeah,
I think it's so true. You just got me thinking. I think that's so important. So I think a lot of people, when they go through change, forget to put that element of certainty in.
Yeah.
And steadiness, and it just all becomes a bit, no one's got anything to hold on to. Yeah. And that's when, unfortunately, I think people start to look to leave because they're looking for an anchor.
Absolutely. I think that's a really great point. And, embracing uncertainty can create massive opportunity. Yeah. But everyone needs something to hang on to, whether that's home, family, or work. Those anchors in your life are fundamental. And there's always some level of certainty in what you're doing at work.
You can find
Most
something.
people's jobs are not changing day to day. I think it's more about helping people understand their role within the bigger picture.
Yeah, and creating that environment that can allow change, but you can calmly navigate where you fit into it. And it's testament, because I've had a lot of people would sit here, a lot of leaders I've met going, yes, we've got our vision and mission. I'm like, have you really? But I've done some work with cans and contagious, and it is, as soon as I started working, I was shown, this is our direction, Joe, this is our mission. And I was like, wow. So it is really nice to talk to someone who's not just saying we've got these things. It is even coming in as an external into your business. I was taken through it to understand it. So
great.
Just want to say full credit, because I think we talk a lot as leaders, but sometimes we don't have that follow through in what's going on.
Great.
Changing direction a little bit. You were, navigated the change now, but you were with WARC, 5 years? Is it 5 years?
Yep.
Very successful 5 years and consistent growth. What can you share with the audience here, and what enabled that? And I'm going to guess a little bit is you had a direction, and this is going to be a bit of a pattern, but what allowed you to keep this consistent 5 years of growth?
Yeah. So, just a bit of a quick backstory is we acquired WARC now about 6 or 7 years ago, but we knew the business really well. And Phil Thomas, who led Lions at the time, had spent a lot of time with the previous owner of the business, a brilliant guy called Mike Waterson. And so we knew we were buying a great business. That's the first thing to say.
Helps.
And it was a business that was already growing really nicely. So our kind of hypothesis, if you like, was that by bringing that business in, linking that to our Cannes Lions event, and starting to explore the opportunities for synergies between both, growth opportunities between both, that we could grow WARC faster. So that was the hypothesis. And I ended up leading that enormous privilege after a few months of owning the business, and ended up leading it for 5 years, and I still oversee it now. But I think the first thing to say is the talent in the business just made my job a hell of a lot easier, because we had some incredible people, and I'm thrilled to say we've still got many of them with us now. So, I think if you don't start with that core of good business, great talent, then it's hard. So we inherited a lot of the conditions, if you like, to enable that growth. But beyond that, there were a couple of things I think that I spent a lot of time doing at the beginning. First of all, to your point, was understanding what is the vision. And I think WARC at the time had lots of ideas, but it didn't necessarily have that really, really crystal clear vision. So with the team, we spent a lot of time listening and talk to customers, talk to the people. And again, in my experience, similar to South Africa, most of the ideas are already there. You just have to have the conversation to tease them out. So building on the knowledge in the business, we settled on just real clarity around saving the world from ineffective marketing, was the line that we used. And because we saw an opportunity to own the space around marketing effectiveness. FE, which is also now part of our business, had a great awards in that space, but there was no one really providing global insight around how do you drive great marketing effectiveness and impact. So we created that as a really singular mission. It was kind of stamped on everybody's hearts within the business. And when we started then investing in the business, because that was another part of it, with more salespeople, more marketing resource, more content resource, we made sure that we were hiring people very much with that mission and vision in mind. So they were really clear where we wanted to go, and that there was going to be change, that we were going to up the pace a bit in the business, and drive it harder. So that clear mission and vision was really essential. Linking the talent to that was also really essential.
Can I ask
as
a
well.
quick question on that? Because I'm thinking, if I'm a listener listening to that, that's really smart. And my first question is, how? So when you are meeting someone and you're talking to them, how do you know that they are aligned to the vision and mission? And how do you present it in a way that someone just can't go, yeah, I'm in?
Yeah, no, it's a great, and I mean, part of that is obviously the type of questions that you ask them, and their experience. But we also wanted people coming from different backgrounds into the business as well, so that we had people from brands, people from agencies, people who had been journalists, etc. So you had a breadth of experience. So a bit of it was about the type of questions we asked, also making sure that we had a process in place where we had several people in for key hires, several people interviewing, so we had different perspectives. And like I said earlier, in the South African experience, actually looking in places that maybe we didn't look before, to find new talent, and making sure we brought fresh ideas into the business. And probably one of the most important things for me was about pace, because WARC had a little bit of it was a little bit self-conscious about being the small fighter in the corner, which I think when you're a standalone company was probably fine. But a lot of the work that I did with the leadership team was really giving everybody the self-confidence that the brand was fantastic, the business was fantastic, that the opinion from WARC, when someone speaks as WARC, is respected in the industry, and then obviously using the Cannes Lions platform to elevate that even more. So I wanted to find talent that also had that bravery, that ambition, and that self-confidence that would elevate the pace of the business and make us go a bit faster. So, setting those conditions at the beginning was fundamental. We obviously then went through COVID during the middle together, and honesty and openness of communication, going back to the theme of over communication, was essential during that period. And then innovation is probably the last piece. We spent a lot of time talking and listening to customers, understanding what they needed that we didn't do. We launched a new advisory business. We relaunched a lot of the subscription products. We put a lot of investment into things like podcasts. So just really made sure that we were brave, ambitious, and we put our money where our mouth was and delivered against the vision that we'd stated.
And I think that put your money where your mouth is I think everyone would love innovation, and people talk about innovation. But acting on innovation, I see as a real challenge for companies, especially because a lot of the time you're putting innovation on top of your already very busy day to day.
Yeah.
How did you make innovation actually happen?
This is a really interesting question, and we think about this a lot. I'm not a fan of having separate standalone innovation labs in businesses, because I think what tends to happen is great ideas might come, but as soon as you move them into business as usual, so the lab can focus on the next thing, they lose momentum. So what I've sought to do with WARC and Simon and I do now with LIONS is we embed innovation into everyone, into the culture. It's one of the fundamental 3 parts of our strategic growth drivers is innovation, and we expect that to come from everywhere. In fact, the best ideas don't come from the leaders, they come from people within the teams, for sure. So creating and fostering an environment where those ideas can bubble up, and where we can have conversations and, give people permission to have good and bad ideas, and then work out which ones we will and won't do. We reckon in the LIONS business, around 10% of our revenue each year comes from innovations that we've done in the previous 18 to 24 months. So that constant cycle of new things and listening to the market, speaking to customers, understanding needs, and then giving permission and space for people to do the work is really, really important for us. But embedding it in the culture, in my experience, is a lot more effective than having a standalone innovation team. I've seen examples of both. Barclays used to have standalone innovation teams, and there were some successes from that, but I think it didn't imbue an overall culture of innovation and creativity, which is, for us, I think, a big part of our success.
And I think it changes, I suppose, how you hire people or anything. If innovation is, what I like is innovation for you, it sounds like it's just the norm.
Yeah.
It's the normal standard expectation. It's not an add-on to your day-to-day, whether you've got a lab or not. It's not something, if you get time, can you do a bit of innovation? Yeah. It actually is, it's embedded in your job description, your objectives, your goals, everything. And I think that's the mistake I think some people make, is it's seen as either, as you say, this separate lab, which then if you're a separate lab, it's very difficult to get the resources and the support to get anyone to be able to give you their time to help you get it off the ground. Or it's just an add-on, if you're not busy this week, can you have a think? Yeah.
And it's, it also makes people's jobs more interesting, right?
Yeah.
Because if you're just there doing the same thing you did the year before and the year before that, and to your earlier point, that eventually will lead someone to probably leave and go and search for an opportunity somewhere else. So from a career development perspective, embedding innovation in the job that you're doing is a much more interesting role to do and role to play. The job for us as leaders, of course, is making sure we then also work out what not to do in order to create the space to do that. So that's always a delicate balance to say, if we're going to do that, what are we going to stop doing? And that's something I've not always been good at, if I'm honest, because I'm always eager to do more and to try new things. And I have to check myself sometimes to say, there's 4 new things we could do, but maybe let's just do 2. So that's something I'm very conscious of, to make sure we don't overload teams. And I've made mistakes in the past where I've overloaded people with too many ideas, and that's a delicate balance. But that comes back to conversations and making sure we're listening and giving people permission to say no.
And those little conversations you have to have with yourself.
Indeed.
Regularly.
That's a regular conversation.
I want to do this, I want to do this.
Yes.
I can't.
And I'm attracted by the new thing, for sure. But you've got to look after the previous thing as well.
Yeah. I remember I joined an agency once. On my first day, I was given 5 pitches to look after. We didn't win any of them because it was just...
Yeah,
people couldn't do 5 well. Yeah. It was just not going to be possible. And I was just like, wow, if this is day one.
Yeah, 100%.
What's my career going to look like? You mentioned when we were talking before a bit about creativity. What's been your kind of personal growth that you're kind of going on at the moment as well, and still learning in?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a career marketer, so straight out of university, I've done marketing, all forms of marketing, all my life. But I came into marketing in Barclays many years ago now, more from a data and an insight lens. So for me, marketing was about really deep insight, customer understanding, using data in smart ways to grow relationships with customers. So kind of CRM and insight, and then product and proposition for the first 10, 15 years of my life was more my marketing focus. So creativity didn't really get much of a look in there. I didn't think about creativity in the way I do now. I came at marketing through the lens, if you like, of effectiveness, actually. So ending up running WARC was an enormous privilege, but also spoke to the background in marketing that I'd had. And in my time at Barclays, which was 13, 14 years, and then I went to a startup after that, so 17 years, I hadn't come across WARC, I hadn't come across Cannes Lions. So these were things that I only learned about really in the last 10 years of my career, and I wish I'd known about them previously. So marketing, I kind of come at it through one lens. I think then, so creativity for me had always felt like the bit that the comms team did. So it was all about kind of communications, and was interesting, but I was more interested in other parts of marketing. And this is all part of life learning, right? Over the last 5-10 years of being associated with the Lions business, and now obviously much more directly associated with it. The inherent power of creativity across every aspect, not just of marketing, by the way, but of business in general, is something that I'm now incredibly passionate about and believe in, and wish I'd really thought more deeply about earlier in my career. And to anyone in any business role, but specifically in any marketing role, reducing creativity to just being part of the communications mix is not doing any favors to anyone in business or in marketing. For me, creativity is something that you do in product design, in packaging, in pricing, in business decision making. The best businesses are those that have creativity at their core. And I just hadn't really, until the last few years, thought about creativity in that way. I just thought about it as the ad that's on TV, and it's so much more than that. It is that too, of course, and that's important, but it's so much more than that. I've seen very well-known people in the marketing industry reduce creativity to just a subset of communications. And I think that's just not true.
No, and I think it's the creativity that is going to keep us all human with all the robots that are coming more than 100%. Anything. And we had Sir John Hegarty on here talking about...
Yes, I watched that. It's brilliant.
The human of creativity. And it's even just how you dress in the morning is using your creative muscle, how you choose to style your hair, everything, and how you choose to share your vision and mission with people has all got a creative lens on everything. And I think the more we can embrace that, and I think the more people go, oh, I'm not creative, it's like we're innate. It's one of our natural things to be that. And I think the more we can see it, the more we can then express ourselves in who we actually are.
100%. And, there's people who work in creative agencies will say rightly that there is a process and a skill to how you develop a creative idea, and they're right, 100% right. But I think it's interesting in the marketing industry that we talk about creative agencies. Most people will think that's just about communications, but actually creativity, whether it's in an agency or a brand or anywhere else, can be applied to so many more things. Apple obviously are one of the most creative companies in the world. They often are quite proud of the fact they don't always have the idea first, but what they do brilliantly is creatively package the idea, the iPhone, the iPod. Most of that tech was already in existence, but they put that together brilliantly, creatively, focused on the customer experience, and created new categories all over the world. So, I think creativity is fundamental to business, not just to marketing communications.
Brilliantly said. I'm going to pull that as a quote. Just a quick pause to ask for your help. We received wonderful messages on how the podcast is supporting you as leaders and helping to normalise the challenges you face. To help us reach and support more leaders, we'd love your help. If you haven't already, please can you follow or subscribe on the platforms you watch or listen to us on, as it makes a huge difference. Thank you so much. And now let's get back to the episode. I'd just love to know is what for you, where would you now going forward like to be more courageous in your leadership? What's the next bit of courage for you?
I think for me, as I get kind of further down in my career, without sounding kind of twee, I'm much more focused on what can I do genuinely to kind of impact the industry and to give back more to the industry. So I'm getting more involved in things beyond just work. And it comes back to some of the things we've already talked about. Part of that's being leaning in more to being an ally to help people get into the industry more, because as an industry, we still are not doing enough to attract young people from all backgrounds into our industry globally, not just in the UK. Marketing is not necessarily a cool industry to be in for some people now. They're much more interested in becoming YouTube creators or doing other types of role. I think we got a big job to do to attract people in and to make it, to tell the story about the impact that we as an industry can have, which is huge, not just on growth of businesses, but on people and on the planet as well. So, I want to spend more time helping and through our platforms at work, but also beyond work, play a bigger role in helping the industry to be the place it can and should be in terms of the impact it makes. And I think we've got a lot to do there. That's
great. Really good. And good luck with that. And any support you need, give us a shout. I think it's something that we all need to take responsibility in. And through, you've had a fantastic career to date, and I know there's so much more you're looking forward to and excited about. If we look back, what is that advice you'd pass on to your younger self?
I think probably the most important advice I would give myself when I was younger is be yourself more. I think like many young people, sometimes at work in the first five years, particularly 10 years as well, maybe, I was trying to be what I thought other people thought I should be, rather than just being me. And that's really hard work, because actually then you're kind of wearing two hats. The person you are outside work, the person you are at work. And I needed to relax into myself more. And that took me a long time to realize that actually just being yourself makes you more effective, actually, because people just relax with you as well.
Yeah.
And more impactful, and it's also just much more fun and it's really, really hard. I've worked with leaders who outside work are one person and inside work are someone totally different. For their teams, that's very confusing, and for them must be exhausting. I know in my 20s I found that hard yards, so that was a really important learning. So I wish I'd relaxed into myself a bit earlier.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I wonder, is that something that just comes with age, or is it something we can just help the young people to know, just be yourself? It's okay, you don't need to go into I actually had a leader I worked with yesterday, was literally I'm one person at work, one person at home, and I was like, that must be exhausting. Why can't you help me understand what's stopping you being the same person?
Yeah.
So it's definitely still something a lot of people are struggling at in terms of the persona or something, in terms of how you're supposed to show up in the office.
Yeah.
And it's not, I think the minute I went through the same, I remember my husband used to say to me, there's work Joe and home Joe. And I was like, why?
Yeah.
Why is that? And the minute I could integrate the two, I was like,
yeah,
this is easier.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think it also comes with, I see if you agree, it comes with letting go of the need to be liked by everybody.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think when you stop feeling like you've got to prove yourself to everybody and everyone's got to like you, because I think sometimes we be this should, because I need everyone to give me a pat on the back or validate me. And I think as soon as you stop needing that, you can relax in yourself a bit more.
Yeah, 100%. I share that, and I definitely felt that. There was a massive desire to be liked. I was quite shy as a kid, and kind of bringing some of that to work. I think there was a desire to be part of the fabric and to just be liked and be part of the team. So that means you don't always put your head above the parapet. It means you play safe sometimes. And it also means, as we've said, you're not necessarily being true to who you are, and therefore you're not performing as well, actually, as you could do at work. So, maybe some of that comes with age, but I see a lot of incredibly confident and brilliant and talented young people in our business who I think are being authentic, and I'm blown away by the talent that we have. But I just encourage people in general, of all ages, actually, not just young people, to really think about how do you bring your whole self to work, because it makes a massive difference.
Is there anything we've missed, anything you'd either like to reinforce or anything else you'd like to share with the audience?
I think just going back to what we spoke about at the beginning about the power of saying yes, and it's not always roses. So sometimes you say yes, and actually it leads to what you thought was an opportunity. Maybe you have to work a bit harder on. So, just one example of that was after I came back from South Africa and decided to leave Barclays, I had an opportunity to move to a small startup, a small scale-up organization. So going from a company of 50, 60,000 people with a massive global brand to a team of 30 people with a very small brand that wasn't particularly well known. And I thought, well, it sounds like a great opportunity, an opportunity to work in a completely different environment back in London. So I said yes. And I think for the first year, I regretted that yes. It was, I had not appreciated at all how when you turn up in a room representing a big brand, people just automatically listen because you are there, not just as yourself, but you're there as the brand ambassador. So when Barclays turns up in a room, people tend to listen. When I turned up in a room with this brand behind me, no one was listening. So I had to completely learn to readapt my style and my argument. It led to me being much sharper about explaining what I did, who I was. But it took me a good year to actually, first of all, make sure I'd made the right decision. And secondly, frankly, to do a good job. I think I did a pretty poor job for the first year because I was adjusting. Ended up staying there for 4 years, and it was a great experience, an amazing learning journey. Again, very impressive people. But that yes, for at least a year, I thought maybe I made the wrong call, but stuck with it, came through it and learned a lot from it. So I think always say yes, but don't expect the yes to immediately be the right answer all the time.
Yeah. Sometimes and get out, or sometimes just stick it through and see what could come out the other side. And what I'm taking out of that is the ability to be adaptable and flexible and not force that other brand to change because you needed them to change. It's actually, as you go back, what can I control? Yeah. You could actually control what you did and how you communicated stuff. So say yes, focus on what you control, and then decide if it's going to work out or not.
Of course. I mean, if it's a toxic environment,
get
leave,
out.
Of course. But no,
don't quit too soon. Though,
I don't
if
like
it doesn't
quit. I
toxic.
don't like giving up. So I wanted to see if I could make it work. So find a way.
Thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure listening to your story, and congratulations on everything you're doing. I know you've got lots of changes happening, but very, very, very exciting. And I want to thank everyone for listening, and we'll see you next week. If you've been loving our Courageous Leaders podcast, please can I ask you to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Your support helps keep the quality content coming and reach listeners like you that we can then really, really help. We fund this podcast ourselves, so to have your support means that we can keep delivering week on week. Thank you.